Project Yellow. This is Daniel, the host. Project Yellow is where we interview professionals to gain insight and knowledge about different industries, jobs, and how to succeed in them. In this first series, we will be talking about tech opportunities beyond computer science major. And to kick off this series, I will be talking with my mentor, Max Yoder. Max is a former CEO and co-founder of Lenhrin. Lenhrin is a powerful learning software company here in Indianapolis, and it is now acquired by Seismic. I'm very excited about this episode because Max talked about what self-compassion is, why it is important, and how we can practice it early in our life. Let's begin. Thank you so much, Max, for showing. First, let's talk about your career background. So can you tell us about your background in tech and experience building companies?
Yeah, well, Daniel, it's always a pleasure to be with you. I wouldn't have missed this, man. So my name is Max Yoder, as you mentioned, and I've been working in software and tech companies for, I'd say, about 12, maybe 13 years. I got my first internship between my junior and senior year of college, and I worked at a design and strategy firm called Studio Science. And basically what they did at Studio Science was if somebody brought a business idea that they wanted to take to the next level, maybe they have a business idea, but they don't know how to build the first version of their software. They might come to Studio Science. Maybe they have a business idea, but they need the company to be named and to get a look and feel and to help figure out who that company is going to sell to. Studio Science could help them. So I got all this experience with all these different people coming into Studio Science. And as an intern, I just got to watch them solve business problems. And what I realized while I was doing it is that people who start businesses are not doing magic tricks. And what do I mean by that? It kind of looked like magic to me. Before I saw it done, in person, it looked like magic to build software. It looked like magic to launch a business. It felt like it took a special something that I maybe did not have. But then as I watched more and more people do it, I realized it's not magic. It's more of a process. And if you follow a process, it doesn't mean that your business is going to work or not, because that takes a lot of luck and it takes a lot of timing and it takes different strategies work and different ones don't. But if you follow the process, your likelihood of at least getting a business to launch goes up. So really, I really built confidence in my earliest days in my first internship of being like, hey, if I want to do that too, I can do it too. So when I graduated from college, I got a job with a software company called Compendium. And it was very helpful for me to be working in a business before I started be working in a tech startup before I started a tech startup. And the more I worked within one, the more I saw, again, it is a process. And I just learned, what works and what doesn't, which I think is the coolest thing about a job, especially right after college, is I started to get paid to learn. I started to get paid to soak up new information and new experiences. And after about a year and a half, at that first company out of college, Compendium, I started my own business. And that business was a polling and surveying company called Quipple. So what it was all about was helping people make surveys and polls, POLLS, that would ask people whether they liked something or disliked something. It was very simple. I was building it in 2011, and you can't imagine how much different the internet was in 2011 than it is here in 2022. And the company Quipple did not do very well, and it didn't do very well because I didn't do a lot of interviewing of potential customers. I kind of had an idea, and I was like, this idea, I think I know how this idea should be built, and I found teammates and partners to help me build it, and I built it how I thought it should be built. And it turned out I was making a lot of guesses about how it should work because I wasn't talking to the people who ultimately I wanted to buy Quipple and use it, as users, as consumers of the product. So I made a lot of guesses, and I built those guesses into software. And by the time we launched the software, it was like 9 months after, we had started, and it turned out Quipple was not what people wanted. So I was a bummer for me. Like, Daniel, I launched the software, and the first day I launched it, people were asking me questions about Quipple that I didn't have good answers for. They're like, why doesn't it do this? And why doesn't it do this? And why doesn't it do this? And I just didn't have good answers for them because I had not been very thoughtful in going out and talking to those people before I built anything. So my number one, or maybe number 2 or 3 piece of advice to somebody who wants to build a company is, talk to your customers first. Get out there and sell it before you build something. And by sell it, I mean, try to see who wants it. Try to see how much they'll pay for it. trying to see what features it's going to need for them to sign up, because those conversations are incredibly valuable, and they can, save somebody else the trouble of building something that nobody wants. It's not fun to build something that nobody wants. It's fun to build something that works. So I built something that nobody wanted, which was a good first experience for me. But it was painful at the time, and by going through that experience, I had learned some lessons the hard way of how to build my next company. So I shut Quipple down, and I started the next business again with friends and mentors called Lessonly. And Lessonly did much better. That this time we did a lot more question asking before we built any software. We brought the customers along for the journey, and they kind of helped inform us what we should build and not build. Does not mean that I was taking orders from the customers, right? If a customer said something that I didn't think made sense, it doesn't mean I necessarily build it, right? I was using my own judgment, but I was mixing my own judgment in and my own vision and my friends, the people that I was building the company with, our vision with the information we were getting. So it wasn't like I was, taking orders from the customer. It was more like I was talking to them, mixing what they thought we should do and with what we thought we should do, and then, coming up with better ideas as a result. And the Lessonly experience was just, it couldn't have been more life-giving. We ran the company for 9 years. We built it to 280 employees full-time with about 30 people who are part-time. So, really big team, in my opinion. I never imagined we would have that many people. And what the software did, which I should have told you right away, it's training software. So the idea was, we'll have software that companies can buy, and they can use our software to build lessons, step-by-step lessons that teach people how to do their jobs. So maybe you started a company and they're using Lessonly. You'll get a bunch of assignments on your first day of work that teach you what the company does, why it does what it does, who it sells to. But they'll also teach you specific things about maybe my job. Maybe I'm starting as a sales development representative, an SDR, and my job is to find potential new people to buy our software. Knowing what works as an SDR is very valuable to me. So lessons from people who have been in SDRs before will show up for me that I can take, so that I can learn from other people who have already done, the job I'm about to do. So what we help people do is understand what it looks like to do their job well, so that, they have a higher chance of succeeding. And we also help them practice whatever they're learning. So, reading something is helpful, but practicing something is very helpful. I'm sure you and I have both read things that we're like, oh, that's very cool, and that would help me a lot in my life. But then if we don't do something with that information, if we don't apply it and practice it, it doesn't matter so much, right? I can know everything there is to know, but if I don't do those things, not making much of a dent. So we have learning, which is just reading and kind of taking information in, and then we have practicing at Lessonly, and those two things are just very powerful. And they allowed us to have, to build our business to more than 1,000 customers. And again, a big team. And we were ultimately acquired by a great company and a great partner of ours called Seismic. And that happened in 2021. And we found out that when people bought Lessonly, they also bought Seismic. So we came together and said, hey, we should be one company. And that's worked out very well because, people are buying our softwares at the same time. And now Seismic is able to sell both Lessonly and their core offerings to their customers. So it was a good run. It was a really good run. And that's my background in tech, kind of in a nutshell. Is I was the CEO of Lessonly from 2012 to 2021 when we sold it to Seismic. I stayed with Seismic for a year, and now I'm just spending my time talking about tech, but also just mostly being a dad and trying to rest more.
Thank you so much, Max. So I can see that you really love self-compassion, and it is very important for you. So can we talk about self-compassion?
Please, man, I'd love to. There's nothing I like talking about more than self-compassion, so let's do it.
All right. First question is, can you explain what self-compassion is and why it is important to you and how it helped you in your personal and professional life?
Yeah, I think it's important when we define self-compassion to show what it is versus what the normal is. Because self-compassion, I think, is something that it's hard to do naturally. Naturally, I think what we do is we're self-critical. And self-criticism and self-compassion are kind of two different ends of a spectrum. And the self-criticism is, I think many people are very familiar with self-criticism. It's when I have a voice in my head that is highly critical of me. So when I make a mistake, it's like, hey, that was so dumb, you shouldn't have done that. And that causes me to, be a little more nervous about the next thing that I try, because I'm criticizing myself a lot. So for most of my life, I was not very self-compassionate. I was really self-critical. And I thought self-criticism was the way that I would be most motivated. So what do I mean by that? I thought if I had to, I thought criticizing myself was helping me. I thought it was the only way for me to not kind of be lazy or be too, to not want to, I thought it was the way I was going to keep making progress. But then I learned about self-compassion because I realized self-criticism was hurting me more than it was helping. I was making progress, quote unquote, by being self-critical, but I was also doing tremendous damage to my own personal health. Because have you ever worked or been with somebody who's very, very critical of you? Did you feel motivated and inspired when people were very critical of you?
A little, for sure, but it hurts.
Yeah, it hurts. Exactly. So you might feel motivated and you might feel like inspired to do better. But let me ask you a different question. When somebody is very encouraging of you and they're caring with you and they say things like, hey, Daniel, I'd like this to change. I think you can do it. And I believe in you to go do it. Is that more or less inspiring than somebody who's highly critical of you? Yeah, totally. I completely agree. And I think generally people would agree with that, right? But for some reason, even when we know that when we're kind of encouraged and nurtured and supported, we know that we tend to be more inspired and think more clearly and we're more creative. We naturally have this critical voice in our heads that does not inspire as much creativity, does not inspire as much inspiration and encouragement. So let's define what self-compassion is. I think the simplest way to think about it is it's being a friend to yourself. And when I say a friend, I mean the loving friend, your most loving and encouraging and supportive friend. But that supportive friend also will tell you the truth as they see it. So self-compassion is not about acting like everything is going perfectly when it isn't. It is actually sometimes about acknowledging, hey, I'm struggling right now. But instead of saying, oh, I shouldn't be struggling because I should be better than that, it's saying I'm struggling. And this struggle is real. And the pain of that struggle is real. And it's okay to struggle because struggling is human. And what do people who are struggling need? They need encouragement. They need support. They need rest. And then it's about giving myself those things, right? Encouragement, support, and rest. So it's about changing the voice in my head from one that is almost angry with me to one that loves me. And that loving voice in my head is not one that lets me off the hook, right? It doesn't say like, you can do whatever you want and it will be great. It says, how do we take better care of ourselves? And how do we love on ourselves more so that we have the creative energy that we need to do better work? So I would think of being self-compassionate as being more friendly to myself. And I still have a critical voice in my head, which I think is very, very, very important to point out. It's not like I've killed the critical voice in my head. I don't intend to kill it. I intend to love it. So these days when my critical voice pops up, I have this self-compassionate voice that I can communicate with my critical voice. So my critical voice comes up and says, that wasn't good enough. And what I know it's trying to say is that it's scared, right? Anytime my critical voice pops up, it's because it's scared. So my compassionate voice will come and speak to it and say like, hey, tell me what you're afraid of. And you're not alone. And I bet we can do this together. So instead of having one voice that's very scared in my head, I now have this calmer voice that can communicate with it and I can calm myself down. And I don't think that's weird at all. Like these voices are in our heads, whether we acknowledge them or not. Like they're just different perspectives in our heads. So my critical voice will still pop up. And if I've gotten less sleep or if I'm not eating well or I'm not exercising well, my critical voice gets louder. But the more I sleep and eat and exercise, my critical voice gets a little calmer and then I can communicate with my compassionate voice. So it's about kind of cultivating these voices in my head. And I hope that helps. I have a couple resources I'd recommend if people want to study self-compassion for themselves, but we can get to that later.
Thank you. Second question is, how can self-compassion help, college students cope with stress and challenges?
Yeah, so let's define self-compassion again, but maybe differently to see if it's a fresher perspective. If life is stressful and being a human is stressful, and I think when we're not compassionate to ourselves, we become unaccepting of the parts of ourselves that we think are below average or average. It's always easy to be pumped about the parts of ourselves that are above average when we're like, hey, I'm really good at that, and be proud of that. But if somebody's really self-critical, then anything part of them that is average or below average, they'll be very harsh to those parts of themselves. A self-compassionate person will be accepting of things that they struggle with, that they're below average at. They'll be accepting of things that they're average at, and they'll be accepting of things that they're above average at. And acceptance does not mean that we might not want to improve in these areas. We probably do want to improve in these areas, but a compassionate person won't be ashamed of where they are, because it's where they are. Like if I'm struggling with patience, I can be ashamed of it and mad at myself, or I can say I'm struggling with patience. And I'd like to struggle with patience less, but right now I'm struggling with it because that's where I am. And then I can say, what do I want to do differently? And I might say, hey, I may be working too hard, or I'm not getting enough sleep. And I can honestly evaluate what I'm doing with my life and say, like, what might I change so that my position might change, right? So instead of being mad at where I am, I see where I am. And how is that helpful for a college student? Well, they're going to be below average and above average, just like me, right? And so if they can look honestly at the places where they're struggling and just honestly say, I'm struggling, instead of acting like they're not or thinking that they shouldn't be struggling, which I think is very common. People are like, I should be better at that. I should be better at this. I should be better at that. And that kind of talk I find to be very defeating and deflating, because according to who, right? According to who I'm not better at it, right? Like, and that's just where I am, and that's okay. So I think just it help if a college student were to embrace self-compassion, I think they'll become more accepting of the fact that they're a human. So by definition, they're going to struggle with stuff and they're going to excel at stuff. And every human struggles with stuff, excels at stuff, even if they don't admit it. And I want to be one that admits it, because I think that gives other people power to admit it too. And then if I come across a struggle, I don't have to be mad at myself for that. I can say that's normal, because every human struggles, right? And I have a healthier and I think saner lens on the human experience. I think it is actually insane. I think it's actually unhealthy to believe that I should just be good at everything, and if I'm not good at everything, then I'm bad at everything, right? That's what we call perfectionism. And I do not appreciate perfectionism. I was a perfectionist for most of my life, and now I'm a recovering perfectionist. I don't want to do it anymore, right? I just want to be a human, somebody who is comfortable struggling, somebody who's comfortable doing things that work and that doing things they're good at, and both, right? Like I want to embrace the whole human experience. So if I'm a college student and I have a highly critical voice, I'm probably not embracing the whole human experience. I'm probably wanting myself to be something that is different than being human. And I think it's very helpful to actually be what we are, which are humans, and humans struggle and humans thrive and humans have joy, and humans have pain, and humans are greedy and humans are generous. And I'm all of it. I can be everything. I can be angry. I can be spiteful, but I can also be kind and loving, right? It just really depends where I am that day or what's going on in my life. And when I'm spiteful, it's not like I love it, but it's a part of the human experience, right? There's a reason that we have a word for it. Well, it's because it's in all of us. So I think just being more accepting of who I am is incredibly important. And I think it would help somebody who's going through the college experience, because they're human whether they like it or not. So I want to embrace that.
Thank you. Perfect. Next question is, how can college students practice self-compassion on a daily basis?
So if I'm struggling, maybe I'm a college student and I feel sad. If I'm not practicing self-compassion, I might tell myself I shouldn't feel sad. If I'm practicing self-compassion, I acknowledge that I'm feeling sad, and then I say, what might help? What might I recommend a friend do if they feel sad? And I might tell them, hey, spend more time with friends, get out of your room, maybe go take a walk, or maybe find a therapist or a counselor or a support group to talk to about your sadness, communicate about it. So somebody who is practicing self-compassion is seeing where they are and looking at it honestly and saying, what do I do next? And often what we need to do next is seek help, seek support. Nobody does this alone. Nobody lives a rich and full life alone. We live rich and full lives by helping one another. And it's okay to need help. It's okay to not feel okay. And if we don't acknowledge that, we're going to get very sick, right? So I think another cool thing about self-compassion is if I'm excited about something, I can love myself through that. I don't have to deny that, because sometimes excitement is scary, right? Excitement is vulnerable. If I tell you I'm excited about something, I'm being vulnerable because I'm telling you something emotionally pumps me up, right? And that exposes a part of my soul, it exposes a part of my heart to you. And that might be a little scary for me. But in order to live a rich life, I need to be comfortable both learning. I need to get more. I would like to be more comfortable sharing when I'm not, when I'm struggling, and also when I'm thriving, and when I'm excited, and also when I'm, scared. So I think what self-compassion does is opens up our ability to say where we are, wherever we are. And that can be very helpful for anybody, college students or not. But I think what it will allow us to do is seek help sooner and talk about things sooner, and maybe even write about things sooner. Like if you want to go to therapy, and you're listening to this and you want to go to therapy, but maybe you're nervous about talking to somebody, self-compassion can encourage us to just write down how we're thinking and feeling. It can encourage us to talk about it, and maybe in our voice recorder that we all have on our phones, and just get it out. And when it's out of our heads, it can feel less scary. It can immediately feel like, we're less intimidated by where we are. So I hope those are some.
Thank you. Yeah, that's perfect. We'll talk about tips and resource right now. So can you share, any tips or resources for college students who want to learn more about self-compassion?
Yeah, there's an awesome book by a woman named Kristin Neff, and she is the leading researcher on self-compassion. It's Kristin space Neff, and she wrote a book called SelfCompassion, SelfCompassion, Self-Compassion. Great book. And it sat on my I bought it and it sat on my shelf for a while, and I didn't read it right away. I think I was a little intimidated by it. I was a little nervous that it might actually have answers that I needed, but then maybe I wasn't ready for. And so it took me like 2 or 3 years to pick it up. And when I did pick it up, I was like, oh my gosh, this has been sitting on my shelf for so long. And it is just this guidebook that helped me understand much of what I've already shared, which is that, self-criticism, while I thought it was helping me, it was hurting me as much as it was helping, if not more. And that I could help myself without so much of the hurt by practicing self-compassion. Kristin Neff is a very, very solid writer, but she also goes on a lot of podcasts. So maybe if you don't want to buy the book, look up her podcast interviews with other people and just listen to one, because she is the first person to scientifically study self-compassion's effect on humans, and to see how it helps. So I'd say that is a major resource. Another one is Nonviolent Communication, which is a book by Marshall Rosenberg. Nonviolent is one word, and there's the 3rd edition. It's called A Language of Life, Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. And that book challenged me in a big way about how I treat myself and how I treat other people, but also just made me a more consistently loving and supportive and encouraging friend, and friend to myself. So I would look into both of those, absolutely, for sure.
Thank you. Very good tips. Next question is, in what ways do you think self-compassion is different from self-pity or self-indulgence?
Good question. Thank you for asking that. Because I think sometimes people hear about self-compassion and they think it is like self-pity, or they think it is, if they practice self-compassion, they'll become too indulgent in their own needs. Like, hey, I'm not feeling good today, so I'm just going to lay down, and I'm just going to lay down forever, right? And like be overly indulgent, kind of not move. I find that to be kind of, it doesn't happen very much. I think it's something that scares people. But as soon as they begin to practice self-compassion, they start to realize that it tends to not lead to those things. And again, Kristin Neff talks about this directly in her book, that, people will worry about self-pity, they'll worry about self-indulgence, but truly practicing self-compassion, what it is, not what we think it is, right? Because I think some people hear self-compassion and they think it's something different than what it is. Being a friend to oneself, a good friend would not allow for overindulgence, right? They wouldn't be like, hey, don't do anything and everything will get better. Sometimes they might just say, hey, if you need a couple of days of sleep, take a couple of days of sleep. Listen to your body. But when we do listen to our bodies, what we tend to do is get more energy. We tend to not feel down and like self-pitying or self-indulgent. We tend to actually feel healthy. Therefore, we can go out in the world and, if we want to, we can accomplish things. Not that is the end-all be-all of a human, and it is not. But if that's what you're looking to do in college, which makes a lot of sense to me, truly being self-compassionate has a very low chance of turning somebody into self-indulgence or self-pitying. Self-pitying, I think for me would be saying, here's where I am, and that is sad and too bad, and the world sucks because this is where I am. It's okay to say, hey, the world is tough. The world is tough. And listen, I'm a white man. If the world's tough for anybody, it's probably not me, right? The world has been, the wind is at my back in so many areas of life that it's unfathomable for me to even imagine it not being at my back in this way. And why do I say that? Is I'm not suggesting that the world is equally painful for everybody, right? But we all have our own pain and our own experiences with frustration and sadness. And if I'm self-pitying, I might say, well, too bad for me, and I'll just stay here and be sad about it forever. Whereas a self-compassionate person would say, I am definitely sad about how hard the world is. I'm definitely scared of how chaotic the world is. I'm definitely nervous that if I try, it might not work. But I also understand that if it doesn't work, I know how to love myself through that, right? And if I do get scared, I know how to soothe myself through that. And those are the tools that self-compassion brings to us, is the ability to self-soothe and self-regulate in spite of the world's, difficulties. Generally and ideally, we're not alone in our soothing. We have friends to help us soothe. We have family to help us soothe. We have a community that cares about us as well. So I don't think anybody should do this alone. But self-compassion can help us when we do feel alone. And then if we combine that with support of friends or family or loved ones, that's even better by a mile. I don't know if I answered your question, Daniel, but I hope I did. And let me know if I didn't.
It is. You answered the question perfectly. Thank you. Next question is, how can college students or anyone balance the importance of self-compassion with the need to hold themselves accountable for their actions? And
so self-compassionate people accept where they are. I'm going to say that again. They accept where they are. So if a week ago, I told myself I was going to get that paper done, and then that day I said, not today. I'm not feeling up to it. And then the next day I said that again, and I kept saying that again and again and again. And now it's a week later, and I haven't gotten that paper done. That might make me nervous about holding myself accountable. And I might say, hey, the last 7 days I have told myself not today. And I think at some point I'm going to have to say today's the day, right? Because I got to get this done. And because I believe in myself and love myself, I understand why I might have waited, because I was nervous about getting started. But then today I say, let's just write one paragraph. And if I get through one paragraph, then that's a victory. And I highly imagine that somebody with that headspace does more than one paragraph today. But a self-compassionate person helps themselves look honestly at their reaction day over day and be like, I keep saying the same thing, and it might be turning into an excuse. That doesn't make me bad or wrong or stupid or lazy. It just is, right? I just might be saying the same thing every day because I don't want to do this. And so how do I say something a little differently today that relieves my anxiety about the fact that I'm not getting this done? And how do I set a goal that I know I can crush, right? Because a lot of times we don't want to get started because we've set goals that are really big and they scare us. And big goal setting and vision can help, but if they're stopping us from even getting started, then they're becoming a hindrance, right? So how do I break up that big goal into smaller goals and just say, it's not about doing this perfectly, it's just about making some progress today. And I'm going to make progress on a paragraph or maybe 2 paragraphs. And if I make that much progress today, my day is solid. I did it. And that kind of momentum, my best friend and a former business partner at Lessonly, Connor Burt, he is all about momentum. And momentum is like wind at our backs. When we do something well, it's easier to do the next thing well because we have this confidence, right? So if we make goals that are thoughtful and that are like the least we can do, like 1 paragraph today instead of the most we can do, that least we can do is attainable. So therefore, we're likely to go, okay, how about one more? How about one more paragraph? Or how about I'm using the analogy of we're writing a paper, but setting those kind of bite-sized goals is a generous way of, easing ourselves into something. And the more we ease ourselves into it, the more momentum we pick up. And if one day it feels like we've lost momentum, well, Connor's question is always, how do I get a little momentum back? And then it's like, okay, I'm going to write 1 more paragraph today, or I'm going to ask somebody to edit this because that'll be progress, right? They're going to push it forward and help me. So thinking in momentum is very helpful. And if I don't feel any momentum today, what is one small thing I can do to get a little bit of momentum? And then what's another small thing I can do to get a little more, And if I lose all my momentum, what's a small thing I can do to get it back?
Mm-hmm. Love it. Love it. So before we go to the last questions, I have one more, which is, how can college students encourage and support each other in practicing self-compassion?
Yeah, I think our job, I believe most of my life, I looked around me and I saw frantic people. I saw people who were not calm. And I was like, oh, all these people around me do not seem very calm. Maybe I should go try to calm them down. And then I would go up to them and try to calm them down. And it took me many, many years to realize that I was also not calm. So I was this uncalm person trying to calm uncalm people down, right? And a frantic person is probably not going to be able to calm another frantic person down. So it became clear to me that my job is to first work on calming myself. And that might be all I need to do to have a positive impact on the frantic people around me, right? Because if I work on calming myself, which is very difficult, maybe one of the most difficult things there is to do, and it's not something that you just get to be done with, right? I didn't just one day be like, okay, now I'm calm and I'll never be uncalm again, right? Like, it's a practice. I have to keep working on it. And my calmness could be here one day and gone the next. And that's okay because I'm a human, right? I fluctuate. But what it helped me realize when I realized I'm not calm and I'm trying to make everybody else calm is first I should work on my own calmness. So what I would recommend for college students who, want to encourage other people to be more self-compassionate is first practice self-compassion with yourself, right? Not because you want to convince anybody else to do it, because you believe first and foremost that helping yourself ultimately does help people around you, because a calmer you makes a calmer world, right? If I calm myself, the world is by definition calmer because there's one calmer person in it. And if you do the same, you are calming the world in the only way that we really can. Like I've tried to change people in my life. I've never done it. I've never succeeded at trying to change somebody. The way that I've changed somebody, if I ever have, is by influence, right? It's by them seeing something that I'm doing and going, I like that. And they then decide they want to make a change that looks more like something that I'm doing. I'm not telling them to, right? I'm not forcing it on them. We don't want things forced on us as people. We just don't. When we feel something forced on us, even if it's something that we ultimately could benefit from, we're like, no, stop. So, my recommendation for anybody is, instead of trying to fix, somebody else, let's take a good hard look at where we struggle, at where our sadness is, at where our anger is, at where our loneliness is, and see if we can soothe those parts of ourselves. Not alone, right? Not without help, not without counseling and support and community and friends. And by doing that, we are doing the work that the world needs. Because imagine everybody taking that approach. And everybody just starts to get calmer. And nobody's trying to fix anybody else. We're just all doing the work, right? I don't believe that everybody has the same fortune in being able to practice this stuff. If I have no food to eat, it's very difficult to have the presence of mind and the space to be able to do these things. So I'm not suggesting, I think we should not judge anybody if they struggle to do this because we don't understand their circumstances, and I'm sure their circumstances are very difficult. We should just focus on, what are my circumstances? Where do I need help? If I struggle to calm myself, it's not because I'm bad at this. It's because it's a practice and it might take more time than I imagine it will. And so Daniel, last thing I'll say is, I'll say more because I want to keep talking to you. But last thing I'll say on that is that practicing things requires us, often leads us to think that we should be good at something in a certain period of time, right? A lot of us will tell ourselves, I should be good at this by this date, and if I'm not good at this by this date, then I must be bad at it. And I think we need to be very aware that we do that naturally, and resist that urge to think that we know how long things take. So let me give you an example. The guy who started Amazon, Jeff Bezos, I don't know if it's Bezos or Bezos, I really don't care, but he one time talked about a friend who was trying to do a perfect handstand. So this friend wanted to be able to do a handstand and stand on their hands without any assistance. And that friend thought it was going to take them about, I think 6 weeks is what he wrote, something like that. Like 6 weeks of practicing every day, and then they'd be able to do a handstand. By the end of the 6 weeks, they were not even close to doing a handstand, and they thought, well, maybe I'm just bad at doing handstands. And then they found out that somebody was out there in the world who could actually coach them on how to do a perfect handstand. And when they found that coach and they talked to that person was like, 6 weeks is not nearly enough time to learn how to do a perfect handstand. It might take you 6 months. And so what does that story tell me? Well, it tells me that I do that all the time. It might not be with handstands, right? But it's other things that I think they should only take this long, and they might actually take that long, right? They might take decades. And I think they should take a year. They might take a week. I might think they should take a week, and they actually should take 3 years or maybe there isn't a period of time that it takes. It's just about practicing it. It's not about having this mark of being like, now I'm good enough. It's about, hey, am I working toward that thing? And, do I see myself making progress? And every now and then I probably see myself getting worse at it when I stop practicing, and that's okay. Because that's the human experience, right? I get better at some things, and then maybe I'm not as good at them after a while, and then I have to practice them again. So what I'm getting at is like, we need to be gentle with ourselves when it comes to the expectations we have for when things should work.
Thank you. That is perfect. So any last thought, any closing thoughts, or, any question that I should have asked that I did not?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say on self-compassion is so many great thinkers, from Jesus Christ to the Buddha, to many psychiatrists like Carl Jung, these people who have thought very deeply about the human experience, they seem to keep coming to the same conclusion, which is that we are highly critical creatures who, if we are lucky enough, can learn how to be more compassionate to ourselves and to others, and in doing so, we can bring a healthier world about. That the criticism is not the path. It is always going to be something that we carry with us that we need to learn to love. But the most important thing we can do is learn to be more compassionate to not only our self-critical voice, but to everybody around us. So long way of me saying that I think there's really something to this. And I hope if you've heard this today, you think, oh, that sounds soft, or maybe that's how you were not raised, that you think that like, this isn't just coming from myself and Kristen Neff and a few people who just came to this conclusion. Some of the oldest texts, some of the oldest thoughts that exist in the human experience boil down to, let's be more compassionate. And I don't think that's a mistake or an accident or a fluke. I think it is the way. And I think our jobs are to go from critical people most of the time to compassionate people most of the time. We're always still going to have a little criticism in us, but if we can be more compassionate, holy moly, it matters. And so the thing that it's not that you didn't ask anything. I just wanted to just repeat what I said, because I think a lot of people will hear about self-compassion and think it sounds weak or soft. And I would encourage them to think more deeply about that. Maybe just give it a try. And then, in general, if you're attempting to get into the tech space, the best possible teammates are ones who are compassionate. They're not the ones who are critical of themselves, because the ones who are incredibly critical of themselves tend to be more critical of others. And they tend to also, not take care of themselves very well, because they're like, I need to do better all the time. And they don't listen to their bodies and allow themselves to rest. So just maybe the last thing is rest matters. And when you're young, you can get away with resting less. But at some point, I hope we learn to rest more. So I didn't rest a lot in my early 20s, and I'm not telling you should do something that I did not do. I'm saying eventually I had to learn to rest, and I am learning to rest because my body couldn't take the work thing anymore. And so, yeah, just over time, developing a capacity to rest and turn off. I think that makes the best teammates, when the ones who do that. They're not only doing one thing, they're stimulating themselves and they're resting. Then they're stimulating themselves and they're resting. Stress, rest. We need both. We are a big muscle, right? Last analogy. Let's say I never exercise. Okay, I never lift a single weight. I never move. What happens to my muscles? They wither away. I never use them. My muscles wither away. Let's say I exercise all the time. I just never stop. What happens to my muscles? They wither away. We've seen people overwork their muscles to the point that they break them. They break down. Their muscles stop working because they're working too hard. So what should we do? Well, we should exercise and then rest. And then exercise and then rest. And what happens to our muscles when we do that? They get bigger. You got it. Because we're giving them, we're stimulating and then we're resting. And that is easy to say and very hard to do. But I think it's an important thing to remember is that's how we grow. It's equal parts stress and rest.
Thank you, Max Yoder, and thank you everyone for listening to this episode. I am Daniel Thang, the producer and the host. Amos Piang is the script writer, and Elijah Lenhrin is the video editor. I'll see you guys again on next Wednesday. You're listening to Project Yellow Podcast.